I think we'll just start now. So, welcome everybody to this information meeting. My name is Jacob, and I am a member of the Ukraine to EU team. I am the Civil Society Engagement Manager, and I will be leading us off today. We also have other colleagues on the team. They will perhaps present themselves when they are to start speaking. I am very pleased to see that we have about more than 200 participants here. That's quite a crowd. So we want to start out by thanking everyone for showing the interest and for taking the time. And we are very pleased to be your partners, at least in this meeting and maybe also in future projects. So the agenda for today, I'll briefly now outline the agenda. Then Mante will outline Ukraine to EU, the program, so that you know who you're talking to. Then I will start talking a little bit about the call. I'll go through what the key parameters are, what it is that the call is all about, how much money is available, and so forth. I'll talk a bit about the eligible and prioritized actions, what it is that we would like to see. I'll talk a bit about the process and the next steps. And then my colleague Jovita will talk a little bit about the practicalities and the grant software. Then we will get into a questions and answers session. We're very pleased that so many of you have already sent a lot of good questions, and we have provided some answers for those that we will go through. And then during this session, you can also submit questions in the chat box, and then we will try to address those as well at the end of the meeting. And anything that we cannot address in the meeting, we will address afterwards, and we will tell you more about that. So everything will be responded to partly in this meeting and partly in written form. And also the recording of this meeting and the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the homepage. And as I mentioned, all the written questions and answers likewise. And just to be sure, if there's any kind of a difference between what is being said verbally in this meeting and what is being written, then it's the written information that counts. So I'll pause it there. We can take the next slide, Jovita. Yes, over to you, Mante, please.
Yes, thank you, Jakob. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I share the thankfulness of Jakob for such a big interest. Good to have so many of you here. We all know that civil society has always been at the heart of Ukraine's EU aspirations, and we are therefore very excited to launch this call for proposals. So just briefly about the program in general, Ukraine to EU has been launched back in January 2025 as one of the EU flagship programs in Ukraine to horizontally back Ukraine's EU accession process. At the moment, its overall budget is almost 17 million euros, and it is funded by the EU, Lithuania, Denmark, and Sweden. However, as a program, it is envisioned to be opened for other EU member states to join later on if they are interested, and to generally serve as a platform for EU member states that are interested in different ways to contribute to Ukraine's EU accession process, to be part of it via different means. And we can go to the next slide. The program, as I mentioned, is sort of horizontal, which can mean many things, but its overall idea is to basically support Ukraine's progressive alignment to the EU acquis and its overall EU integration efforts, with a very clear outcome at the end of it. We are preparing Ukraine for EU membership. And we can go to the next slide. And as I said, the horizontal nature of the program can mean many things. But in reality, what it means to us is that we follow the rather structured EU accession process, EU accession methodology, and support our main beneficiaries on the way going through that process. So, for example, probably a lot of you also know, and I know that a number of civil society organizations have already been involved in that process. Ukrainian institutions now have been going through the so-called screening process, and we were supporting preparations, organizing mock sessions, etc. When the Ukrainian institutions were preparing for these bilateral screening meetings with the European Commission. Then there is another stage of negotiation positions, national program for adaptation of acquis, etc. And we also support doing that. So generally, the program is structured via like 3 or 4 components, depends how you count. We have what we call a component for coordination and management and monitoring of the overall EU accession process, where we mainly work with the Deputy Prime Minister's office, with the Government Office for the EU integration. Then there is a second component for legal harmonization and translation. So we support institutions in providing compliance assessment with the EU law. But also as a program can get involved in drafting the actual laws when there is such a request from our main beneficiaries. And we also work in the communications field, so building state communication capacity, strengthening strategic communication on EU accession, and generally increasing the awareness and understanding of EU accession in Ukrainian society. And the fourth component is what we call the horizontal component. So this is what's mainly relevant to you, is that we want to facilitate Ukrainian civil society's contribution to all of these areas of work. So basically, we expect civil society projects to contribute to any or each of these components where we work. And as I mentioned, generally the program may evolve in different directions if more member states are joining with their own ideas and expectations. But the overall focus on Ukraine's EU accession and providing very targeted EU accession related support remains at the heart of the program. So maybe this is where I end and give over to you, Jakob.
Yes, thank you very much. So then we will get into the key parameters. I'll start out with the objective and the purpose of the call, which is it's written in a bit longer in a longer phrase in the documentation, but basically it's what you see there: to engage civil society organizations or CSOs in the support of Ukraine's EU accession process. So it aligns with what Mante was just talking about. If you want to move on, Jovita. Yes, so the amount that we have available for this call is 1.5 million euro, which is not a lot, especially considering that we have now 230 or so participants on this call. So we are aware that that is not enough. That is the money that we have now. We hope to be successful and get more money for later calls, but for now we are talking about 1.5 million euro. The size of the individual grant, the maximum amount is 200,000 euros. We are also indicating that the optimal grant size is 125,000. And that is simply because we would like to stretch the money. If we only have, if all our grants are 200,000 euros, we'll get like 7, 8 projects. If they are a bit smaller, we'll get more projects. But it is possible to go for 200,000 euros. We are doing this in a 2-step process, as we will explain on a later slide in 20, 30 minutes, I guess, or so. And the idea is that we ask you to be brief now in your submission for this stage 1. We're basically asking you to submit, if you're interested, a 3-page document which outlines your idea. And then based on all of these submissions that we get, I mean, if you all submit an expression of interest or this kind of a first stage application, then we'll get more than 200 of those. And in order to save time for both you and us, we are saying, let's not ask everyone to do a full proposal now. Let's ask everybody to do a brief description of the idea. And then we will shortlist or invite a number of you to do a full proposal later. And the idea is that because we have 1.5 million euros to hand out or to grant, we would invite for stage 2 CSOs with a combined estimated budget of 3 million euros or so that half of the organizations would be successful in stage 2. We will get back to that. It's just to say, be brief now, and more will come later. So the eligible organizations that we are looking for is basically capable and experienced Ukrainian NGOs or civil society organizations. And that means that we are not looking for foreign NGOs or private firms or what we could call beginner NGOs or individual consultants. And it's not because there's anything wrong with any of these types of organizations. We just think that we have more to offer at this point if we work together with capable and experienced Ukrainian NGOs. And we are also aware that, for example, for what we could call the beginner NGOs or the more early stage NGOs, there are many other support mechanisms that offer smaller grants that also include a capacity development element, and that's not what we do. And so that's sort of the major outline of that. I'll get now to the eligible and prioritized actions. And basically, you can apply for support for quite a broad range of activities or actions. There's a list there. It can include, for example, advocacy, public consultation and communication, impact assessments, analysis and drafting of legislation, and inputs for negotiation processes and EU accession broadly, as well as other activities which are related to the above. So quite a broad range of activities. And as many of you will know, the EU acquis or the EU sort of legislation is divided into 6 overall clusters, and then further subdivided into a number of chapters, more than 30. But if we talk about these overall clusters, you can apply for funding for all of the clusters, but we probably have well, not probably, but we will have a preference for clusters 2 to 5. So cluster 1 is related to rule of law, and we are certainly not against activities of CSOs within cluster 1. We are just noting that there is already quite a few activities happening and quite a few support opportunities for cluster 1. So we think that we can add more value by supporting more in clusters 2 to 5. What about cluster 6? Well, cluster 6 is external affairs, and if you have a good idea for a project in that cluster, you can certainly submit it and we'll consider it, but we think that clusters 2 to 5 are perhaps a bit more important at this stage, but we're open to all ideas. Next one, please. All right, so sled dog rather than watchdog. What does that mean? In Ukraine, as well as in many other countries, the CSOs, they have a role as sort of being the watchdog and critiquing the government in a number of ways and offering their constructive critique of what the government is doing. That has certainly played a very important role in Ukraine during the last decades in the reform processes, and it's played a role very recently as well. We are very much in favor of that, and we acknowledge and appreciate the role that Ukrainian CSOs have played in this kind of a watchdog role. But it's also possible for CSOs to work more like sled dogs. What does that mean? You know, a number of sled dogs, they will all pull in the same direction. That means that CSOs can work together with government and offer, for example, their technical expertise or their expertise within public consultation, and together with government be useful in moving the EU accession process forward. We are probably going to prioritize proposals from your side that see yourselves more in this kind of a cooperative role and a little bit less in the watchdog role, but we are open to both. And again, it's not because we are against the watchdog role, not at all. It's just that we see that there might be more of a gap in terms of funding for the other parts, for the other type of activities. But we are open for everything. All right. Another element in terms of eligible and prioritized actions is that we would like to see actions or proposals from your side that are relevant to the government and or the RADA policies and priorities linked to the accession process of Ukraine. And we don't have a fixed checklist for how to define what activities are particularly relevant and which activities are not. We're giving you here some examples of where one can look for such indications. That will be, for example, the annual enlargement reports about Ukraine's progress in the enlargement process. It can be, for example, the 2022 action plan by the Cabinet of Ministers. It can be screening reports. They're not necessarily public, but you may have access to them anyhow. It can be different types of roadmaps. There's at least one for cluster 1. It can be references to the European integration related commitments and priorities as they're expressed in certain or in different sectoral strategies. Or it can be in the form of an endorsement that you might receive for your project from a relevant state body. What we are saying here is essentially we would like to be able to see that you have considered how your proposed action is actually relevant to what is prioritized by either the government or the Rada or both, so that we know that we are working alongside what is considered important. You can take the next. Yeah, this one starts a little bit from the bottom. That's fine. Just take all 4 of them. That's fine. So what we would like also to see is actions that are engaging with some of the, we call them here, heavy or difficult directives or EU directives as opposed to the easy directives. What does that mean? It means that some of the EU directives are really difficult to implement. They can be difficult financially or technically or economically or institutionally or in other ways, whereas other directives are really quite easy. We would prefer to see that you engage with those directives which are heavy and difficult, because that we think that's where you can add the most value and where the government may benefit most from your interventions. The second point there, use government structures where possible, feasible. The working groups, for example, many of you will know that for each of these negotiation chapters, more than 30 of them, the government has established working groups, which are supposed to be the fora where CSOs, civil society, other representatives of society, of industry organizations, labor unions, etc., can get together with government and use the working group as a forum for interaction, for discussion, for dialogue. We would like you to use government structures or propose use of government structures in your proposals wherever that is possible, feasible. We are also aware that, for example, these working groups are not always functioning perfectly well, and there are some things they do better than others. So we're not saying this is mandatory. We just like to see that you have considered how best you can engage with the existing structures. Then we would like to see proposals that are engaging with impact assessments. What does that mean? Well, it relates to these heavy and difficult directives that I mentioned just before. For the implementation of these difficult directives or other types of EU legislation, it can be useful to have a competent impact assessment carried out, which demonstrates what would it really take to implement the given directive in terms of finance, what would it lead to in terms of economic impacts, what would be the technical or the institutional implications, and so forth. And we think that many of you would be able to make use of your technical sectoral knowledge and help the government in doing these types of impact assessments, and that can help the government in its negotiation position versus the EU, and also in its planning process for the implementation of these directives. We do not yet have a full list of which impact assessment might be a priority, but we're working on it. And there will be most likely some kind of an indicative list of topics for which impact assessments could be relevant. If and when we get it, we'll put it up on our webpage so that everyone has access to it. And then a final point here, last but not least, we would like you to be innovative and, for example, come up with innovative and good ideas for how to combine the need for speed and the need for quality in the drafting process. And I'd like to explain that a little bit. Ukraine, as any other accession countries has had to do, Ukraine will have to adopt quite a lot of new legislation. Nobody knows exactly how much. But one figure that's been going around is that Ukraine will need to adopt 500 pieces of major legislation before its accession. Now, its planned accession is in 2030, so that's 5 years from now. If you do the math, that means adoption of 2 major pieces of legislation per week until then, which is a daunting task for any country, including also for Ukraine. So there's a great need for speed in the adoption of the acquis, in the adoption of new legislation. At the same time, there's also a need for quality. And what does that mean? Well, there's a need for technical quality, so that all of these new laws that are being drafted and adopted actually make sense and are coherent. There's also a need for what we could call democratic quality in the drafting process. There's a need for consultation. There's a need for involvement of citizens, and that typically takes time. So there's a conflict between the need for speed and the need for quality in this accession process when it comes to adopting new legislation. And if you people, you, the CSOs, can come up with new and innovative ideas for how to achieve that, I don't know how it's done. Maybe it's some kind of use of artificial intelligence or digital democracy or new ways of interacting with government, whatever it is, we would be very interested in seeing good ideas from your side. Next, please. All right, so I'll move to the process and the next step. I already talked a little bit about it, but here you see it again. So what you can do if you're interested in participating in this call is go through these steps here. First, you submit a brief and precise first stage application or a concept note by 1st of September, which basically include, as I mentioned before, a 3-page narrative description of the proposed action. And you're pretty free to choose the format for that. I mean, you can use, some will know the log frame terminology of inputs, activities, outputs, objectives, impact, that kind of thing. You can also describe it differently. But we are asking you to stick to maximum 3 pages to provide a coherent and convincing description of what it is that you want to do. We are also asking you to submit some very basic information about yourselves and to sign a declaration that you meet a number of criteria, which we're not asking you to document at this stage, but we will ask you to document later if you're invited for stage 2. All of that is to be submitted through the Good Grants system only. So you cannot send us anything by post or email or anything like that. It has to be uploaded through the system. And in a moment, Jovita will tell you a little bit more about that and how it functions. Jovita, if you want to press the next. Yes. Then some of you will be invited to a second stage. And that is where you will submit a more detailed proposal, and there will be a need for more lengthy documentation. But we, as I mentioned before, deliberately push that to stage number 2 so that we don't ask 200 organizations to do that, but maybe we ask 20 organizations to do that. Yes, Jovita? All right, so this is the immediate plan. So you can see item number 1, the information meeting. That is what is happening today. Then you can submit questions or request for clarifications from the contracting authority. That's essentially us. You can do that until August the 18th at 18 Ukrainian time. And then we will endeavor to answer as quickly as we can. And the last date on which clarifications are issued by us would be August the 25th. So you would still have some time before submission of the proposal to react to that. But we will, of course, try to do it as quickly as we can. Then the deadline for the submission of the concept notes, which then need to be uploaded to that system I talked about before, it's September the 1st at midnight. And then we hope that we will be able to invite you. So we hope to have a quick processing or evaluation process from our side and spend basically 2 weeks doing that, and then invite some of you to submit a full application by indicatively September the 15th. Then we go into the full proposal stage. We cannot know for sure how long that will take, but we aim to be quite quick about that as well. So maybe if everything goes as hoped for, we would have contract initiation for those that would be funded by early next year, so around 1st January or whatever it might be. Yes, Jovita, the next one.
Okay. So I will take over from Jakob. Let me present briefly technical part, basically related how to submit the concept note at this stage. As Jakob already said, so we are using the Good Grant system, and all the applications should be submitted only through this system. The system, to enter the system, first we have to log in or register firstly, and this is a 3-step let's say sequence of events. The first step is when you register, you will receive a verification code to your email. Just check them. Check carefully your email. It might go to junk email as well, but you will receive a 6-digit code, which you have to enter. After that, you have to register your information. And after the completion of registration, you will enter the Good Grant system, and where you will be able to fill in and submit the concept note. When you will start filling in the concept note, but you will need to actually to fill in all the fields. All of the fields are mandatory, and this is also included 2 checklists for you to check whether you are eligible. It's simply a self-check to carefully check whether you simply could potentially receive the grant. But it's not an official evaluation. This is just for you to do as a guidance tool. There are 2 main documents to be uploaded in the system. So one is the description of the proposed action, which is the concept note itself. So please follow the formats of the files that can be uploaded. Other formats will not be able to be uploaded. So carefully check. This is, at least for example, for concept note, is docx or doc file only. The other document that you need to upload is actually declaration of the lead applicant. So this file should be signed and uploaded as signed one. So doc and docs file will not be acceptable. When you fill in everything and upload the file, so then you have to press the button submit concept note, and after that your concept note will be submitted, and you will receive a notification that your concept note was submitted successfully. In case of technical problems, when submitting the concept note or filling in the system, any kind of data, etc., so do not hesitate and contact us via email grants@ukraine2eu.eu. In addition, what we strongly advise is not to wait till the last date to submit the application, because due to heavy internet traffic or I don't know, like poor connection or whatever, you might not be able to submit the concept note on time. And after the deadline, the Good Grant system will be automatically closed, and you will not be able to submit a concept note after the deadline. Yeah, so answering already the question, so what forms to be used? So I also add the link here where you can find the template of the concept note and the template of the declaration. These you should download from this webpage, fill them in, and then upload to the system. So for the concept note, maximum of 3 pages, doc file, and then you upload to the system. For the declaration, you download, you sign it, and then upload signed declaration to the system. And in addition, please download the guidelines where all the information regarding the scope of proposal is indicated, and read carefully the guidelines. In addition, so question and answers, all questions and answers already received during this information session, or to be received later on before the deadline, what Jakob presented. So they will be also published in the same webpage. So there will be added additional light question and answers, and check regularly whether there are additional questions answered in this section. I think, Jakob, that's it.
Yes, thank you. Once again, I want to thank you all for all the very good questions that you have already submitted to us. It makes our life a little bit easier, and it makes it possible for us to give you information already at this stage. So we have received, I don't know how many questions of up to 50, I think, already at this stage. And we have tried to group them into sort of some key areas here, and then we'll give you the responses here so that you have that information. You don't have to answer or to ask these questions again. So some of the questions are about the eligibility of the action. Some are asking, for example, you see it there, how CSOs working on cluster 1 can participate in the call. And the second question, this competition is aimed primarily at supporting initiatives operating in clusters 2 to 5. We work with cluster 1. Is it appropriate to participate in the competition or not? And our response there, as I've already alluded to, but I'll read it out here again. The reason that priority is given to clusters 2 to 5 is that there are already many funding sources and ongoing activities related to cluster 1. Any CSO proposing actions in cluster 1 would have to justify the need for these activities very carefully. So that's sort of the approach to that. Jovita, you can take the next. Yeah, so this is again about the eligibility. There are 3 questions here. I'll just read them out. And the answers. So 1, should the project cover the national level or the particular communities, regions are eligible? And our response is, it is not mandatory that the project would have a national focus, so you can have other types of projects as well. The second question there, we are preparing a concept note on Chapter 9, Financial Services of Cluster 2, Internal Market. Will it be accepted? And our response, actions in Cluster 2 and Chapter 9 relating to financial services can be included in a concept note and considered. So yes. Whether it will be accepted and advanced to stage 2 in the evaluation process will depend on the quality of the proposed action concept note and its competitiveness relative to other concept notes. But it is certainly possible to suggest something in this area. The third question at the bottom, is it possible to include in project agenda ad hoc activities upon to request of the state authority in specific area chapter? And here our response is that while acknowledging the dynamic and fluid nature of the EU accession process and the need for flexibility, we would advise to design actions that have a clear and considered direction rather than designing an ad hoc support facility. So this is a sort of a response which is, you can see the direction of the response, but it's also a little bit flexible because we do acknowledge that, of course, the EU accession process is very fluid and needs may arise, but still we would like you to propose something that has a clear direction. So if you were to come up with a proposal where you said we want to allocate, we're asking for 200,000 euros and we are allocating 100,000 of it for an ad hoc fund, that's probably not going to be very positively evaluated. We can take the next, maybe, Jovita. It's again about the eligibility of the action. So there's 4 questions there, and they all have the same answer. It would be great to find details of the scope of work, all potential topics and activities at high level, if we could provide that. And the second one, could you provide some examples of projects eligible under Cluster 4? Is it possible to submit a project focused on cleaning riverbanks or installing solar systems for water sources? And third question, whether a broad sociological survey of Ukrainians could be funded by this program. And the last one, how to improve situation about freedom of speech in Ukraine and speed up movement to European Union. And our response to all of those 4 questions is that we cannot provide specific examples of eligible projects or details about the scope of work and potential topics, but also that to clarify a bit, that the call for proposals is open for a broad range of potential actions, including advocacy, public consultation and communication, impact assessment, analysis, and drafting of legislation and inputs for negotiation processes and EU accession broadly. So you'll have to start out with that and see, do you fit into that? And do you fit into the other criteria that we have put into the call? And then the last part of our response, that eligibility criteria for the action and cost are outlined in sections 213 and 214 of the guidelines for applicants. So we cannot answer 100% clearly about any specific project ideas that you're bringing up. We can only give you this sort of quite broad, but also, I think, reasonably specific guidance. Jovita, the next one. Still about the eligibility of the action. So is forestry eligible for the project is one question. Another question, possibility of supporting the development of a regional cluster for the processing of agricultural products. And third one, are educational projects eligible to participate in the call? And we can say in response to all of these three questions that such actions are not excluded from the call, provided they're designed to meet the objectives and priorities of the call. So it's a response that looks a little bit like the previous response I just gave you, right? Then there is at the bottom there a question, could this project consider support activities for critical infrastructures in Ukraine? And our response is that as the call aims to encourage CSOs to support Ukraine's alignment with the EU acquis and broader membership goals, the activities proposed must directly reflect this. And furthermore, infrastructure development is subject to the limitations on eligible cost set out in section 214 of the guidelines for applicants. And what this means is essentially we are essentially a sort of a project that's focusing on policy and not really on building infrastructure. Then we have some questions here about the eligibility of the applicant and the co-applicant. And there are three questions here. Can a state university be an eligible entity applicant for the purposes of this grant? There's a question, is it possible for a CSO to apply in partnership with a commercial entity? And also the last one there, would international CSOs not having a CSO status in Ukraine be eligible to apply? And our response is that the applicant and the co-applicant must be non-profit making non-governmental organization as defined by the law of Ukraine on public associations. Hang on, you need to go back a little. There you go. Good, thank you. Now you went back too far. We need the one that says, yeah, there we are. So the response is that the applicant and the co-applicant must be non-profit making, non-governmental organization as defined by the law of Ukraine on public associations. And then you see the numbering and the dates. And that means also that both the applicant and the co-applicant must meet the eligibility criteria as outlined in section 211 in the guidelines. So basically, you have to check these guidelines and you have to check these criteria. But tentatively, I would assess that the answer to those three questions is when you do study the guidelines, probably not applicable to apply, right? But you have to check that yourself. Yeah, now we can take the next one. It's again about the eligibility of the applicant and the co-applicant. So three questions. Are international NGOs that are established and operating in Ukraine also eligible to apply? Does the applicant CSO need to be registered in Ukraine or can they be registered in Denmark? Organization has obtained legal registration in Ukraine. The funds are managed out of our headquarters outside Ukraine. Are we eligible as a lead applicant? And then again, our response is that the applicant and the co-applicant must be established in Ukraine, and both of them must meet the eligibility criteria that are outlined in the relevant section of the guidelines. So you'll have to go in and double check that, but you do need a formal establishment in Ukraine. But you can also, I mean, it's okay if you are formally established in Ukraine, you can be part of a broader network, fine. Yeah, Jovita, next one, thank you. Again, about the eligibility of the applicant and the co-applicant, and that one there, the first question, could you please confirm whether the minimum annual turnover for the lead applicant must be above 200,000 euro, and at the same time, at least double the amount of the requested grant. Now, we received quite a few questions from your side relating to this financial threshold, and our response is that following the number of questions received, we are considering to issue a clarification in the upcoming days, and that information will be provided at the following web address that you see there. We expect to do that quickly, and we are very grateful for all of these comments about that grant, which gives us an opportunity to clarify. I don't think we will deviate from our overall objective of wanting to attract quite capable and quite reasonably well-established Ukrainian CSOs that can, so to say, hit the ground running. But we might want to add a little bit of precision to the way we have put in these financial requirements, so you can look out for that. And then the second question, can the eligibility criteria in section 211 on annual turnover and double the grant size be met by jointly the lead applicant and the co-applicants? And then our response is that this eligibility criteria is applicable only and solely to the lead applicant. So it's only the lead applicant. Yes, Jovita, next one, please. That's sort of the broad category of other questions. So the first one, is it mandatory to apply as a consortium with co-applicants, since this is mentioned several times in the guidelines? And our response is no, it is not mandatory to implement the project with co-applicants. The lead applicant may act individually or with co-applicants. So you can go for this call as one organization or as several organizations. And the second question, could you please clarify who will make the final decision on awarding the grants? I'm going to read out that long answer there, but essentially it's saying the evaluation committee established by the contracting authority will examine and evaluate the applications. Based on this evaluation, the evaluation committee will make a final recommendation to the contracting authority, which will confirm the final decision on awarding the grants. So we will have some people doing the evaluations, and we will have other people doing the approvals or asking questions about the evaluation. Could you also provide details on the financial flow once the grants are awarded? And we can, yes. So the funds will be transferred directly to the lead applicant according to the payment schedule outlined in the grant contract. The lead applicant will then transfer the funds to the co-applicants, if any. So was that the last one, Jovita, in terms of the questions? Yeah, then you take this one, Jovita.
Let me try to reshare the open questions, which are from the chat.
Okay.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, I see the slides. So these are some of the questions that are arising from the chat, and I will then, together with colleagues, try to sort of answer on the fly, but we will, of course, also provide written answers. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, is if there's a difference between what I or my colleagues might be saying now and what we respond and our written response later, it's the written response that counts. But we want to be useful and provide a verbal response now. So let's take it from the top. So can a project work under multiple clusters if the question is cross-sectoral? I would think the answer is clearly yes. What results are prioritized? Legislative changes, tangible outcomes such as the construction of a facility, or media products? What we would prioritize are actions that best serve to achieve the overall objective of helping Ukraine join the EU. I would think you need to consider, when you do a proposal, how your proposed action will help to achieve that overall objective. So it very much depends on how you design the project or the intervention. I would tentatively think that construction of the facility would not be something that we would be likely to support. Legislative changes or engagement with the legislative process is more likely for us to support. Media products, if it's part of a consultative process that is meaningful and useful relative to our criteria and our objectives, that could be considered as well. But we will provide also a written response, of course. The third one there, together with other CSO, we plan to provide some analytical support, impact assessment, public consultations, etc., for the Ministry of Economy. While some tasks have been provided already, more will come soon. At this point, the future needs are uncertain. Therefore, is it possible to mention some more general tasks scope in the grant proposal, like providing analytical support for the MINECO or the Ministry of Economy regarding legal approximation of Chapter 3 acquis? I already answered a relatively similar question earlier, and I'll try to repeat it here again, but in the more specific context. Yes, we are aware that there is a need for flexibility, so we do understand if someone would want to propose this. At the same time, we don't want to set up simple ad hoc functions. We would like to see that there's a clear direction and a clear impact with the proposal that you're making. And also, I would think, because the duration of the projects is relatively short, maximum of 18 months, it is actually possible to define and decide something that has a direction. That being said, we are open for flexibility as well. So maybe we can take the next one, Jovita. Yeah. Will cooperation with a European partner be an advantage? We'll have to consider that further, but I would think not necessarily, but it might be. It really depends on whether you design something that can help achieve the overall objective. And then again, there's also the eligibility criteria that we are working with Ukrainian organizations, so you need to consider that as well. Will the application from a coalition of organizations be given priority during the evaluation? No. You can come in as a single organization or as a coalition, and none of them are by default better than the other. But of course, if you can establish a coalition that brings to the table a synergy or special skills or complementary skills, then we can give that priority, but it's not the idea of a coalition in itself that adds value. Will the organization's own contribution be given priority? So that the way I interpret that question is that our proposal is open to fund 100% of any given activity. So I interpret the question to mean, what if we were the CSO to fund, for example, 50% of the activity and asking only 50% from you? Would that be an advantage? And I don't think it would be, but we will give you a written response. But the way that the evaluation criteria have been set up at this point, I don't think that would be a specific priority for us. More questions, Jovita? All right. Is it possible for one organization to submit 2 applications? Yes, it is, but not more than 2 applications. Does first stage narrative description should also include preliminary budget? Should the concept note indicate the total budget amount, and is it necessary to provide a breakdown? We are not interested in a detailed budget at the first stage. So we are interested basically in the total amount. I mean, if you want to provide 3 other budget lines saying so much for staff and so much for office and so much for whatever, fine. But we're not asking for a detailed budget. What is our interest is the total amount. Once we get into full proposal stage, of course, we will need a detailed budget. So I would guess it's an advantage for you to do a budget for yourself anyway, so that you're well prepared should you be invited. Is the time of deadline in CET, Central European Time? I think it's in Ukrainian time, isn't it?
It's Kiev time.
Yes, Kiev time. Is there a limitation in number of partners? No, not formally. So there's not. At the same time, we are funding relatively small projects up to 200,000 euros. So I'm not sure it would be an advantage to have too many partners with that amount of funding, but up to you. If you have a good idea that requires many partners, we'll certainly look at that. What is meant by turnover? Is funding received earlier from donors included? That is a financial question. Yes, it is. I mean, if you're a CSO and you receive funding from a number of donors, then the turnover is how much money you're spending in a given year, right? So it's if you receive a grant from a given donor of, say, 1 million euros, but you're spending 200,000 of that money in the given year, then your turnover in that year is 200,000, right? So you're not counting the total grant, but you're counting how much of the grant are you using in that year. That will be the financial meaning of turnover. Next one, Jovita. Should NGOs invest their own financial resources? Not directly. We are open to fund 100% of the action. Can projects be shorter than 18 months? Yes, they can. But we are not really looking for sort of brief one-off interventions. We're looking for something a little bit more tangible. So we would probably be a little bit less interested in, for example, someone coming and proposing that they want to host a discussion meeting or a conference or whatever, and then that's it. So it can be shorter than 18 months, but we're not looking for 1-month interventions. But then again, if you have a very good idea, we will certainly consider it. As of now, our NGO is not non-profit on a single tax. Do we have to change the tax status at the stage of submitting the concept note or at the stage of concluding the agreement? Good question. I actually don't know. We would have to get back to that one.
At the stage of submitting the concept note.
Okay, good, Jovita. Then that is clear. At the stage of submitting the concept note. Thank you. Could you please explain a bit more in detail regarding the educational activities which are eligible within the grant? And I think I answered that one before by saying we can't really go into that much detail about that. So if you're proposing some educational activities which are clearly contributing to achieving the overall objective that I discussed before and that mentioned as well, then that is eligible. So that is sort of the criteria that you have to apply, and then also looking at the other criteria that we have about impact assessment and using government structures and dealing with heavy directives, all of that stuff. So that is really the lens you have to look at these educational activities through. Yes, Jovita? Is there a priority for projects in the regions over Kiev? There's not a priority for projects relating to Kiev or projects relating to outside Kiev. That's open. You can propose whatever is most relevant to achieve the overall objectives. Will you consider supporting communication activities under Component 3 focused on foreign audiences, for example, in the EU or globally, or the focus is entirely on Ukraine domestic audiences? We will have to answer that one, consider that one. My immediate reaction is that we're looking at Ukraine domestic audiences. I don't know if Mante or Jovita, or do you want to comment on this one, Mante, maybe?
Yeah, I can briefly comment. Our core mandate is, as a technical assistance project, is to support activities in Ukraine and focused on Ukrainian society's understanding, knowledge, etc., of the EU accession and EU affairs. Having said that, there can be a little bit of flexibility, but it cannot be the main focus of the overall project. This is how I would put it, but yeah, definitely we can come back in writing and maybe consult a little bit also with our donors.
Good, thank you, Mante. So the third question there, can the project focus on advocacy and media content that promotes EU accession, showcases progress and positive cases, and builds public support for related reform? If so, is cooperation with government bodies mandatory in this case? My immediate response would be yes. I mean, what is proposed there. So my response to the first part of the question is yes, that is something that could be considered. It would, of course, have to be a well-designed project and competitive and so forth, but that there is certainly not excluded from the scope of work. Is cooperation with government bodies mandatory in this case? I would say I would not use the word mandatory, but I would make reference to the earlier statements we have made about we want to see this aligned with government priorities, but there's not a mandatory requirement that you have to cooperate in a specific way with government bodies, I would say. Mante, maybe you want to add to that one as well, or are we fine?
Yeah, I can comment. I think, yeah, indeed, fully support what Jakob described. And regarding this cooperation with government bodies, mandatory, non-mandatory, of course not mandatory, but it's important to reference to then overall Ukraine's commitments to the EU accession. And the way this alignment with government or other priorities can be showcased is also referencing to Ukraine's commitments generally to the EU accession, to Ukraine's commitments to certain reforms that you potentially would like to promote with your activities.
Thank you. Yes, Jovita, there we go. Are international partners required? And if so, what are the donors' preferences? Should the partners be NGOs, media, or government institutions? International partners are not required, so we don't have any preferences. Should the partners be NGOs, media, or government institutions? I think that's answered implicitly as well. You don't have to have any of those as partners. You can partner up with whoever makes sense for you to achieve the overall objectives and whoever meets the applicability, eligibility criteria, of course. So it has to be a CSO. Yeah, Jovita, do you want to comment on this?
I wanted to add that read carefully the requirements for partners. So the partner should meet the same requirements as the lead applicant. It should be the CSO established in Ukraine. So it's not an international organization or a media or government institution. So read carefully the requirements.
Okay. The second question, is there a sample form for filling out the declaration? Jovita, that must be you.
It's the declaration template that it is in the webpage, the link I shared with you. So you download it, fill in the personal information that is required there, then sign and then upload it. So the template is there on the webpage.
Okay. Speaking of the cluster 2, are there any areas of production that are prohibited or discouraged within the grant framework? Not to my knowledge. No. I don't know what that would be. I mean, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but you have to go back and check the overall objectives of the call and these different priorities that we have mentioned that I've been through a few times. And if you're proposing a project that focuses on some area of production within cluster 2 that also meets these requirements, then you can make a proposal and we can consider it. Is there anything else, Jovita? Oh, was that it?
Let me check. I think no.
There's probably more. Let's just wait and see if there's more from.
We cannot put them online, just to add online questions.
And maybe before you, Jovita, you are still looking the questions. regarding partners, I assume there can be a difference between a co-applicant and a partner. I mean, an organization with which you associate yourself that somehow helps you to do the project, but it's not an implementing partner, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there are 3 types. It's a lead applicant, it's a co-applicant, let's say, right? And then there can be associates and contractors. So contractors, these are the ones that you contract to implement activities, to help you implement, and associates who might participate in the project activities, but they are not, how to say, they are not incurring expenditure. So they might participate in the activities, let's say, but that's it.
Okay, so and the question regarding the foreign partners, foreign entities, would they be eligible as associate partners?
Associate, yes, but associate. So they will not be eligible to incur expenditure. This is what I'm saying. But to participate in the activities, of course, yes. Okay, I think here are a few more questions.
Okay. Can we submit 2 applications and be part of other consortia, not as the lead? We'll have to double check that, but I think actually no. You can
No, you can. I may answer this. So the lead applicant can submit only 2 applications, and you will not be even technically possible to submit a 3rd application. But you can also participate as a partner in another application. So this is not. There are no limitations in this area.
Okay. Should the first stage narrative description also include a preliminary budget? If yes, is there a sample budget available? I think I answered that before. We are just interested in the overall budget amount. So we are not asking for a detailed budget or preliminary budget. Will it be financing before grant activities or in the form of compensation of cost? I think I answered that before, but Jovita, maybe you want to clarify?
I think the question is about pre-financing. So the idea is to implement the contracts giving pre-financing in tranches, but the payment schedule will be defined in the grant conditions.
Yeah. Good. Is there more? There's something. Does the Association of Legal Entities formally meet the requirements for CSO compliance? Does the Association of Legal Entities formally meet the requirements?
You should check the law.
I'm not quite sure.
So whether the applicant meets is a CSO, you should check is as defined in the law on Ukraine on public associations. So if you are eligible in line with that law, then you are eligible.
Yeah. Can the applicant be a business association? I'm going to give you a tentative answer, but we'll have to come back to that. I think probably yes, if you are an NGO, if you're a non-profit, yes, that could happen. But we'll get back to you in written form. Is there a standard template or format that should be followed when preparing the concept note? I think Jovita answered that. So there is a file you can download and fill out, but basically it's quite open. So you have to write your 3 pages in a way that makes sense. But Jovita, you may want to clarify.
If I may add here, so in the standard concept note, there are clear instructions of what kind of information we are expecting from you to fill in and see how to describe the concept note itself. So if you're using your own form, that's fine, but then you do not have any kind of guidance, and then you're just losing some sort of useful information. So better please download the concept note and fill in the format. It's very easy, nothing to be scared of. It's an open template, basically.
A question on thematic focus. Could you advise if a project centered on strategic communications for Ukraine's defense industry, for instance, an advocacy initiative to support their integration into the EU market, would be considered relevant to this call, and if so, under which funding cluster it would best align? That's an interesting question. Thank God we have Mante here. Do we have a response to this one, Mante? It's a tricky one.
That is indeed an interesting question. I don't think we have a response here. I mean, it would have to be justified, you know, how it helps Ukraine to progressively align with the EU acquis, right? Because that's Ukraine currently has a lot of different agendas, and of course we would like to support all of them, but as a project we provide very targeted EU accession support. If you can justify how it supports Ukraine's progressive alignment with the EU acquis, basically Ukraine following or preparing itself for following a number of EU standards, then probably it could be, but not straightforward. Yeah, but perhaps we will also have to discuss and come back in writing on this.
Right. The fourth question there, or fifth, should all activities take place in Ukraine, or is it allowed to have some abroad? We are focused on Ukrainian activities, so not abroad. Jovita, I don't know if you wanted to add something or just the
I
next
just
slide.
clearly indicated in the guidelines that the actions must take place in Ukraine.
Yes, okay. Do we have more questions?
Maybe we'll get one here.
Okay.
Oh, no, it works without closing.
All right. Would it be allowed to adjust the proposed budget, example, plus minus 10% at the second stage, or shall it be the fixed amount? It will be allowed to adjust the proposed budget. We have a percentage in there. I've forgotten what it is. Was it 30% even, or 40? There's quite a, but you can check the guidelines, but it would be allowed. We do acknowledge that you are doing a stage one, which is sort of a relatively, if not superficial, and at least a brief planning process. And when you get into the details of it, there might be variations, and the budget might be different. Of course, you cannot exceed the 200,000, but you can make changes.
So if I may add here, it's 40% indeed.
It's 40%, okay.
Yeah, but you cannot exceed the total amount of 200, the grant of 200,000, so you cannot exceed. So the limitation is still there.
But that means that if you have submitted a proposal at stage one where you have indicated 100,000, then you can at stage two submit something that is 140,000, but you cannot go to 200,000, right? You can also submit something that is 60,000 at stage two if it's cheaper for some reason. Should the partner also be a non-governmental organization if the applicant is a non-governmental organization? I think Jovita answered that before, but Jovita, do you want to repeat it again? That's with the different types of partnerships.
The same, it applies the same for the lead applicant and the co-applicant. Both of them have to be non-profit, non-governmental organization established in Ukraine, and plus additional criteria listed in the guidelines of applicants.
Yes, and then in addition to that, you can have sort of partners, if you will, in the project, but they will not be eligible for spending any of our money, at least. But they can still be in there and do whatever they do. Yes, that was those two questions. Are there more questions, Jovita?
More or less, that's it, I think.
Okay.
Maybe some questions were skipped, but then we will definitely answer them in written form, and then we'll publish everything in the webpage.
Okay. But then I think before I give the floor to Mante to come with the final remark, I would like from my side to thank you all for participating. We've had more than 200 participants today. We very much look forward to getting your concept notes. We very much look forward to working with you. We are very grateful for all of the questions that you're submitting. They're helpful for us also to get a sense of where you are and to clarify anything if it needs to be clarified. And we will certainly do our best on our part to be a good partner and to respond as quickly as we can and in a reasonable manner. So I'll leave it at that. And Mante, I don't know if you want to have the closing remark here.
I think you closed nicely. I can maybe I can just add or like reiterate regarding the cross-sectoral question, like cross clusters. I would say it's even encouraged because there are some areas that are from the policy perspective rather difficult, and they are usually cross-sectoral or cross-clusters. And I think this also links to all the questions about the communication activities, to which cluster to assign communication activities. They can be linked to clusters, specific clusters, because communication activities can also help to explain certain EU areas, specific areas, rather than just promote the European idea in general, right? And we would actually really encourage that, but they can also be cross-sectoral. Other than that, we are very much looking forward for good, well-designed, targeted projects that would prepare Ukraine for EU membership.